And welcome to the shaman's view, the view from the invisible world. And today we're going to be spending time with journeying. In each of the cultures, of the great cultures around the world, has a spiritual practice. And the spiritual practice is designed at the ultimate level to take you into that communion and experience of the divine. At a very lowest level, it's designed to help you manage your fear and your anxiety and to help you find calm and peace. And all of this, of course, in my opinion, stems from the fact that we have a brain that is far too complex and too complicated, that's not able to find inner peace easily. Every other species in the planet is able to reset its fight or flight system. It's able to meet danger and fight or flee and then reset the system automatically. With this quiver, you've seen it in the animals, a quiver that begins at the very tip of a deer's nose, and it goes right through their body and out their tail. And then they go back to grazing after the tiger has left. But humans have the only brain that is not able to reset fight or flight. And most of our spiritual practices at the most popular level are really designed to help us face fear and deal with stress and deal with anxiety and prevent post-traumatic stress. Because we cannot reset fight or flight. We have a brain that is so complex that we cannot do it. So before we approach a shamanic journeying practice, we need to be able to reset fight or flight. So let's begin with about 30 seconds of our exercise, our practice to reset this fight or flight system that has been so switched on for all of us. Some of us had it turn on since birth. If you were born into a family that was not safe, you were born with your fight or flight turned on. And what happens then is that you go into step number 3, which is freeze. So it's fight, flight, or the deer in the headlights. You freeze. And when you freeze, your immune system is frozen, your emotions are frozen, your life is frozen. But we can reset fight or flight through our breath. Because this is the interface between the autonomic nervous system and the one that we can regulate. So it is through the breath. And you know, for humans, for us humans, breathing is an automatic function. We cannot stop breathing until we die. And you cannot commit suicide by holding your breath. But for dolphins, for example, breathing is not programmed as an autonomic function into their nervous system. So if a dolphin is not happy with its life at the amusement park, it'll go to the deep end of the pool, settle in the bottom, and decide to stop breathing. We cannot do that. So we're part of an experiment in biology and in nature. And through the breath, we can reset our fight or flight system. Let's take about 30 seconds together, and then I'm going to go into the 3 modalities that we know of spiritual practice, which are the practices of prayer in the West, of meditation in the East, and of journeying among the shamans. But first, let's do our reset of fight or flight. So inhaling deeply, exhaling through the nose. And let's take another deep inhale, and this time exhale through our mouth. And let's inhale to a count of 3. 1, 2, 3. And exhale to a count of 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhaling to 3. 1, 2, 3, exhaling to 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhaling to 3, 1, 2, 3. Exhaling to 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhaling to 3. Exhaling to 5. Inhaling to 3. Exhaling to 5. Inhaling to 3. Exhaling to 5. Deep inhalation and hold the breath. And exhale gently. Releasing with that breath anything that you do not need to hold on to. We're all familiar with prayer. Prayer is an important part of my life. And we're all familiar with prayer. And as a young boy, I remember praying to God for what I wanted and what I needed, what I thought I needed, including the toys that I really wanted to have and the health of my grandmother. I didn't want my grandmother to die. And I remember fervently praying and asking God, please help my grandmother. Don't let her die. So I was asking God for the things that I wanted. It was kind of like my Christmas list. And this is maybe the most popular form of prayer. In Latin America and South America, if you go to the church, you find that all of the saints in the Catholic Church, with their long robes, they have prayers pinned onto them from the Indians, from the people that come to go to the church. Please help my baby. Please, I want that new car. So most of the prayer we're familiar with is asking for stuff. Later, as we mature, we pray in gratitude. We give thanks with our prayer. No matter what is happening in our lives, we pray with gratitude. We give thanks for our food. We give thanks for our breath. We give thanks for our loved ones. We give thanks even for our difficulties. It's a practice of gratitude. And later, as our prayer becomes a little bit more mature, we practice communion. You find this in the mystical prayers of St. John of the Cross, or of Hildegard of Bingen, and you find it in Rumi, where Rumi says to the beloved, to God, he says, "For I have ceased to exist. Only you are here. I have ceased to exist. I disappear. Only you are here." What a beautiful, beautiful form of practice. In the East, you find that the practice is not prayer, it's meditation. Even though there's a lot of prayer, a lot of mantra recited, but you find that meditation becomes the practice. And at the beginning of meditation, you're focusing on your breath, you're quieting the mind, you're observing the mind, you're counting your breaths, you're going a little bit nuts because you're uncomfortable, you can't sit still and your back hurts. And finally you begin to observe the mind, and you begin to notice that the mind is actually quite mad, that the mind is mad. And then you learn to practice the dog chasing stick mind practice, where you throw a stick for the dog, and I throw a stick for my dogs, and they'll come and take it and they'll bring it back to me. And they want me to, and each time I throw it a little bit farther, and the mind goes out a little bit farther, being quiet for a little bit longer, and then comes back and then wants another stick thrown out. You get to witness the mind, and eventually your mind begins to quiet. And as the mind begins to quiet, your nervous system begins to quiet. You could begin to practice stillness and deep, deep quiet. And then at that point, you begin to have the elevated practice of meditation, which is that experience of oneness, of the singular taste, that one taste of all reality, that experience of communion and oneness, similar that you do with prayer. With shamans, our practice is journeying. So journeying is a very unique shamanic practice because it involves making our way through time, traveling through time, learning to track. Shamans are trackers. And in the same way that we can track a deer through the forest, the shaman is able to track along their client's timeline to an event in the past that might have derailed their destiny, a trauma that keeps playing itself over and over again in their current life, with their current relationship and their current job. But they also, and this is of course useful for the practice of soul retrieval. When you practice soul retrieval, you have to journey back along a person's timeline and you find an event maybe that occurred 600 years ago in a different life. And then you'll find that that trauma caused soul loss. And you'll coax that soul part back. Invite that soul part to come back to help your client step back into their destiny and not be living in the grip of fate. Because fate, as we know, is fatal. So as you develop your practice of journeying, and this requires, of course, stillness. You have to first come to that place of stillness in the same way that you do with prayer and with meditation. You come to that place of the mind becoming very, very still, of understanding that the mind is like the surface of a lake. That if the surface of the lake is perfectly still, that it reflects everything around it precisely as it is, in perfection. The trees and the forest and the sky and the clouds. But the slightest ripple of wind on the surface of the lake, and it reflects nothing but itself. And it's the same with the shaman. The shaman understands that the slightest ripple of thought, and then you see nothing but yourself, but your own projection of yourself in the world. So you have to find this great, great place of quiet in order to be able to journey through time. So at this point, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the notion of time in the medicine traditions. Because to us in the West, time flows only in one direction. Time flows only from the past to the future. So that you go to your doctor and she'll ask you, what did your parents die of? And you know that these are the influences in your life. These are the genetics that you inherited, or the illnesses that run in your family. Or you go to your therapist and the therapist will ask you, what happened to you when you were 6? Or tell me about your birth. So in this conception of time, we can only be influenced by the past. We're always the product of the past. And this is a problem. But shamans understood that time doesn't fly like an arrow. The time not only flies like an arrow, but it turns like a wheel. And it pretzels and it figurates back onto itself. And you're able to be influenced not only by the past, but by the future. That the future can reach back like a giant hand and pull you towards the desired state. In this case, it might be a state of health. If your client or you're dealing with a difficult diagnosis. And I remember a client of mine who was a really distinguished physicist who worked at Stanford University at the linear accelerator. And at the linear accelerator, they were accelerating particles to 99.9% of the speed of light to replicate the conditions in the universe 2 seconds after the Big Bang, after everything was created out of nothing. Fascinating man. I met him at a dinner party, and they were trying to determine if the universe was going to continue expanding forever or if it was going to begin to contract at a certain point into what they call the big crunch. Was there enough matter in the universe that it could continue to expand forever? And I remember asking him, what does the universe expand into? And he said to me, it doesn't expand into anything. Well, isn't it like a balloon inside a room that expands into the room? He said, no. The universe, as it expands, creates space and time as it expands. And he calls me up a month later, and I asked him, what's the fate of the universe? Are we going to live? He said, yeah, it looks good. It looks like there's enough matter in the universe for it to continue to expand forever. And of course, the stars will grow farther and farther apart, and in a few 100 million years, we'll look up at the night sky and we will not see any stars, because it'll be like the surface of a balloon that's expanded so much. And I said, oh, how sad. But that's good news. We're going to live. He said, yes, good news for the universe, but not for me. He had just been diagnosed with a very late stage, very aggressive cancer. And he said to me, I'm a scientist, I've done the research, I know that only 2% of people survive longer than 6 months with my condition. And out of that 2%, 90% of them die with one crippling condition or another. So he came to see me, and we began to do illuminations and extracting intrusive energies, and then soul retrieval, recovering those parts that he had lost as a result of childhood trauma. But then we began to do destiny retrieval, to track forward along his timeline to find a future healed state. And we had to go through that 2% window, because that was a 2% window of people that survived this condition. After a couple of months of work and of journeying, we were able to go through that window and find a future healed state, and both of us recognized it at the same time. We found it and we installed it in his timeline. And that future state began to reach back like a giant hand and pull him towards health. And he went through that 2% window. But of course, to go through that 2% window, he had to change 98% of his life. Everything had to change in order for him to step into his new health. His relationship, his work. He left his job as one of the heads of the linear accelerator and went to live in Alaska and became a wood carver. And the last I heard from him was 9 years after this event. He did not die, of course. He stepped into a new destiny. He had found a new destiny for himself. He was able to journey and select among all of the possible destinies available, the one that included exceptional health. So it's help. This is what we do as shamans. What we do in the West as ordinary men and women is to extrapolate from the present, is to try to discern which way the future is going to be showing up, whether it be in the stock market or in a relationship. Is this a good investment for me, this relationship with this person? Is it going to work out? And you've got to, calculate the probability, and then you invest your emotions, or you invest your money, or you invest yourself in a new job. But the shamans resort to tracking. They know that the past can be thought about as a solid cord of light extending into the past, but that the future are many threads of destiny. They're like these little fiber optic cables that children have in their sparklers. There are many possible threads of destiny. In one of those threads, you die young. In another one, you live a long and healthy life. In one of them, you lose your money. In another one, you make a fortune. There was a Native American group a couple of hundred years ago that were kicked out of their land. They lived in Oklahoma. The U.S. government seized their land. They put them in a reservation. And this group was known as the Onage. And their shamans did a divination. They tracked into the future to find where they should take their people. Now that the government had taken their very fertile land, the Osage people. And they approached the US government and said, we want to buy this piece of land north of where they were settled. And the government surveyors laughed at them because it was a piece of barren land, nothing grew on it. There wasn't even water. There was just these fetid, decaying pools of black liquid. So the government sold them the land and the subsurface rights. They bought the whole thing with their money, the little money they had. And the people were very distressed because their shamans had led them to this barren land that nothing grew except petroleum. And within a decade, the Osage Nation became the wealthiest people in the Americas. Their medicine people had taken them to a place they said, Mother Earth will look after us here. This is where the mother will take care of us. And then, back then, they hadn't even discovered that petroleum was a rich resource. Today, we're faced with the same challenge and opportunity. How do we navigate through all of the different choices and possibilities and difficult choices that we're facing? The shamans did it through journeying. If you lived on a coastal village and you were a medicine woman, you had to take the fishermen to where the fish were going to be the following morning. You had to future track. If you were a medicine man and your people lived in the mountains, you had to take the hunters to where the buffalo were going to be the following day. If you got there and there were fresh buffalo tracks, but no buffalo, you lost your job. The shamans have always been future trackers. And this is what they have done. They have tracked into the future of humanity and helped to select the most desirable destiny and install that in the timeline of their village or of an individual. But here's how this works. When we think of what is good for what is the greatest good, we tend to think of number one first. I want to find out what's best for me, the best job, the best relationship, the best economic situation, the best place to live, what's best for me. The way the shamans track has the reverse order. The first one is what is best for Mother Earth? What is best for the earth? The second, what is best for the nature that we live in? Then what is best for my village or my people? What is best for my family? And what is best for me? We tend to go the other way around. We want to look after number one first. And that makes the whole system collapse. It cannot be about personal gain. It has to be for the greatest benefit of all. And then the personal gain comes as a result of it. So this is what I call dreaming the world into being. So when I teach this to our students, the practice of dreaming the world into being, at the beginning, everybody thinks that we have to visualize the kind of world that we want to have. We have to install it with visualization. The way that a world-class athlete, for example, might rehearse a ski run in their mind to install a successful run down the mountain. But this kind of tracking, of journeying, It's not about that. This is about discovering that luminous thread out of the millions of possible destinies of futures available. We have millions of futures available, and they're shifting all the time based on the decisions that we make and the choices that we make. Is selecting out of those many possible alternate futures the highest possible destiny for their community, for the earth, for themselves. And of course, it's impossible to track through all of those destinies. You have to ask Spirit to guide you. You have to ask Spirit to guide you, but you have to do the tracking. You can't just say, well, God, you take care of it. No, God invites you to be in partnership. Spirit wants you to be in partnership, in co-creating. Otherwise, you say, well, God, you take care of it and I'll show up for the party. I'll show up to open the presents. No. We have to co-create. We have to ask the help of Spirit. We have to track, find, install, and then Spirit takes care of the details. So journeying is the art form of the shaman. Not only journeying to the past to help recover a lost soul part and help recover somebody's destiny, because whenever you have soul loss occurring as a result of trauma, you have a person's destiny being derailed. And then instead of being in their destiny, they're in the grip of fate. When you do a soul retrieval, you recover that destiny. You come back into alignment with your purpose. You have your guidance system intact. Your instincts begin to serve you well again. And then you move forward. Then you're able to change your outside circumstances because you have all of the energetic resources. You're intact once again. But our task today is to do destiny retrieval. And remember that that works first at the level of the world, of the earth, of Mother Earth. Then at the level of your local nature, of your village, of your family, and of you. We have to envision the highest possible destiny for the earth right now. One in which humanity can live sustainably, one in which we can be at peace and live in peace, one in which the rivers and the tree and the waters and the air is clean. So this is our time to dream that world into being through the process of tracking. Not of creating what we think is going to be best, but of tracking that destiny line that we can install into our future and have it compel us, bring us forward to that place. So to do that, of course, we have to let go of everything we thought we wanted, of everything we thought was right, of everything that we thought would make us whole, complete, enlightened, awakened, successful, conscious, illumined. All of it we have to let go. Because we're not manipulating the future. We're not twisting the arm of God to try to create what we believe is most beneficial for us. We're opening ourselves to tracking what is of the greatest benefit for the earth. So I invite you to join me again in fire ceremony. And do this at home. Do this in the evening by yourself. Open sacred space. And I want you to blow into that stick everything that you thought you wanted about tomorrow, about how the world should look and how it should behave and what it should be like and what returning to normal would be and what the ideal future would be. Let it go so that you can truly become available to an extraordinary destiny. So all of us can participate in that. This way we empty ourselves. This way we empty ourselves of all of our preconceptions. Let it go. Surrender that so that it doesn't have to be stripped away from you by life, so that we can become an empty vessel, open to possibility, open to miracles. And when you do so, miracles become commonplace. They become everyday and ordinary. So the question that I frequently get is, well, if we have to track a long time, how do we do that? How do we track along timelines to the past and to the future? And the answer is that you have to step outside of time. We have to step outside of ordinary time. I teach my students how to create a sacred space where they expand their 8th chakra. The 8th chakra is this radiant sun above our heads. It's a halo that you see around the saints, around the Christ, the light that you see around the Buddha. It's this radiant sun that is above our head, the 8th chakra, that exists outside of time, and it manifests in time. We are the manifestation of this 8th chakra, this luminous egg that is who we are between births, between incarnations. This luminous egg, this 8th chakra, is outside of time, but it manifests in time. So what the shamans have all learned to do was to drop into their breath, and bring their hands up using their intentionality, their intention, into this 8th chakra, and expand it around themselves. Enveloping themselves in that light and radiance, stepping into infinity, outside of time. And enveloped in this radiant sun of timelessness, that is before time and after time, prior to time itself, there they could track a long time. They could track backwards to the past, forwards to the future, outside of time itself. They could bring the rattles out, and they could follow a person's timeline, almost as if they were walking over a golden highway to their past, or they could follow that timeline to the future. They could do that with their own. They could do it with the timeline of the buffalo, or of the fish, or even of an entire people, or even of an entire country. And if they did that, they became the prophets. They left the prophecy of the time to come. Among the Andean peoples is the prophecy of Pachacuti, of the end of time, the end of an era that we're living today, and the dawn of a new time that requires each one of us to track who we are becoming 10,000 years from today, and to embody that today, to inform ourselves by who we are becoming, and not by who we have been, not by the cancer or the heart disease that runs in our family, but by the perfect health that is the legacy of the future, that we can inform ourselves from the future, not only from the past. And when you finish your tracking practice, you close this radiant orb, the Viracocha, the source of the divine, and you bring it into your body, to your head, your chest, your belly, and back to the earth, reinforming your body, healing your body from that source that informs all life. when we don't do this practice, of course, we have to settle for being informed exclusively from the past. And that's no fun any longer. Inform yourself. Download the codes of that new human, of that you from 10,000 years from today. That we can grow a new body that heals and ages differently. That we can become that new human that we've been waiting for. We can do that today. Thank you for joining me in the Shaman's View. Take this to your practice. Make your fire. Put everything into it. It's a time for us to come up with a tabula rasa